You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Greetings, Clarkesworld citizens. I hope this podcast finds you well. It is our second story, issue 199, for April 2023. As always, whether this is your first story or over 750 at this point, we want to thank you for coming by and lending your support. If you'd like to contribute monetarily, you may do so by going to patreon.com/Clarkesworld. We're going to need your help in the coming months as Amazon is getting rid of a big source of income for us. So if you can spare $1 or more a month, just to show your support in that way, we would be eternally grateful, as we already are, for just coming by and listening. Our second story is titled, There Are the Art Makers, Dreamers of Dreams, and There Are Ais. This one's by Andrea Kriz. Andrea Kriz, who can be found at andreakriz.wordpress.com, writes from Massachusetts, where she does research as a molecular biologist. Her stories have also appeared in Lightspeed magazine and Asimov Science Fiction, and have been translated into French and Galaxy's SF. Her short story collection, Learning to Hate Yourself as a Self-Defense Mechanism, named after one of her Clarkesworld short stories, is upcoming from Interstellar Flight Press. And if you like what you hear, you can go back to Learning to Hate Yourself as a Self-Defense Mechanism, Resistance in a Drop of DNA, and Communist Computer Rap God. So, my dear listener, I hope you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Juno perched on the edge of a strawberry-colored settee, nibbling on a cookie as Maker Mio scrolled through her portfolio. She tapped an immaculately manicured nail over the painting Juno had selected as her showstopper. Gazing. Swirls of blankness splayed across incandescent blues, their absence of color along with touches of shadow suggesting, rather than outright depicting, clouds floating across the sky. A figure stood at the bottom of the digital painting, her dress an echo of the scene above. All at once, the work displayed Juno's landscape as well as a portraiture ability, not unlike Maker Mio's own. But the Maker was scrolling faster now. Was that a good sign? Juno wondered. Bad? Maker Mio set down Juno's screen device with a smile, tilting her head to the side. I'm sorry, but no. Juno had imagined this meeting, this answer, every hour, every day for so long that the words fell with the impact of twin bombs. But she knew every second was valuable to a maker who could be using this time to create original art, and was using it to screen the portfolios of aspiring creators instead. So she swallowed the lump in her throat. I understand. You must get license requests from thousands of people wanting to train on your work every day. It's just... Do you have any advice for me? It's just not good enough. I'm sorry. Maker Mio scrolled back up to the gazing, limply, as if even that was too much effort. My licensees are expected to, yes, use my body of work as inspiration and instruction as they develop into artists. But they have to do so much more than that. They have to intertwine their art with themselves, create something uniquely human and entirely their own. A licensee can't, just learn some superficial patterns and churn out art that looks like mine, like some kind of generative AI. The cookie she'd taken out of politeness crumbled in Juno's mouth. Was Maker Mio really comparing her work to that of a Gen AI? She'd barely had the strength to smile, to thank her with the required necessities, to try to claw out a foothold with small talk. Because, as one of the panelists in the last Creatorpreneur conference she'd attended had said, if the maker liked you enough as a person, you might get a chance to revise your portfolio and resubmit it for consideration. But already Juno had been escorted to the door. Her lips still moving, but unable to form any words that would distinguish her from the thousands that sent their portfolios to Maker Mio every day. Oh, goodness, Maker Mio tittered. Look how pale you've become. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm honored, really, that you shared your portfolio with me. Other makers, get so touchy about people training on their art, and only asking for a license later. But I would never. Supporting young artists is one of my passions, so please feel free to post anything you showed me on your social media feeds. Of course, Juno thought bitterly, as the door shut firmly behind her. You won't send a cease and desist after me. You'll just auto-claim every bit of profit I manage to eke out from clicks and ad revenue. With pattern recognition algorithms that painstakingly point out which elements of my art have been trained on yours. That's the brand you've built off the Generative Art Licensing Act of 2046. But it only made sense Juno consoled herself on the 2-hour-long 3-bus ride back to her apartment. The 2046 Act was the only reason she as a human even had a fighting chance to become an artist. Before then, Gen Ais had run wild, reaping whatever artwork they could find to train themselves. Humans couldn't compete with the derivative art Gen Ais learned to churn out. Until the 2046 Act. Juno pulled up her favorite vid of Maker Mio, the speech she'd given at the unveiling of her most famous work, In Memoriam. We've already lost so many artists who simply couldn't make a living anymore, Mio expounded in front of the virtual mural. It was an overcast cloudscape synthesized out of thousands of abandoned sketches by people who no longer painted. Back then, Mio had been known as the Bleeding Brush, with a trademark red teardrop painted at the corner of her eye. But with the 2046 Act, we've finally received justice. Those Gen AIs that scraped the net for our art have been destroyed. Those who profited off of them have to pay us back. And if they decide to train such AIs in the future, they'll need licenses. In 2046, becoming a maker had been as simple as submitting an application and verifying you were human. Maker Mio's newly established Bleeding Brush Corporation had been the first to argue that maker designation could only apply to truly original artists. Gen AI art had been indistinguishable from human art. So what was the difference between a Gen AI that trained on a maker's work without a license and a human who'd done the same? Even if their processes were different, both still ended up as profit-stealing competitors. Perhaps things could have been different if AIs had been regulated before they'd become self-aware. But as it was, Bleeding Brush's machine learning division had been forced to develop algorithms to protect Maker Mio's work from such parasites. Other maker brands had soon followed. And here Juno was, 10 years later. She couldn't argue with the algorithm's decision. Weren't Maker Mio's work-in-progress live streams the whole reason Juno had wanted to become an artist? She'd been randomly recommended one, wasting away behind the counter of a Your Name in Chinese calligraphy stand on a boardwalk 40 minutes away from the house she'd been living in, with 5 roommates. And Mio's words about bearing your soul had moved her. She'd picked up a brush and followed along. Stream after stream, she'd learned what screen device Maker Mio used and saved up for the same one, learned what apps she used and downloaded them, adjusted her brushstroke and filter settings, so they'd look as good as hers. And now, thanks to Mio, Juno's art had become liked enough that people would watch ads on her social media feeds to view it. Didn't Maker Mio deserve the right to choose who profited from using her work as training fodder? Or fair recompense from those who did it without permission? Welcome home, Juno. Juno's house, well, cramped studio apartment. AI slid open the door, turning on the lights as she slogged inside. She curled up in her window seat and buried her face in her hands. At least she'd taken the day off delivering true crime-themed meal experiences. She'd been hoping to delete that stupid creepy Edie app off tomorrow, of course. She'd saved up enough money to make a go of living off her art with the patronage of Maker Mio, who hadn't even said that Juno was promising enough to contact her when her next portfolio was ready. But she couldn't keep moping. Juno straightened, taking her screen device out of her bag, ignoring the hairline fractures seeping across the glass. That was how you succeeded. All the licensed artists at the virtual conferences said. You didn't dwell on rejections. You just picked yourself back up and started on your next portfolio, the one that would actually win the approval of a maker. You couldn't even waste time thinking about the paintings that had just flopped. But how could she start over without the inspiration of the sweeping skies, the soft post-apocalyptic landscapes of Maker Mio? Juno's stylus dipped, twisted, paused above her screen. Despite herself, she thought of the other work-in-progress streams she'd seen over the years, the forests of Maker Maxim and the shadowed faces Maker Z specialized in. No. She swiped away her first lines angrily. Only a fool would attempt painting a style that required licenses from multiple makers. I detect from your body language that the interview with the maker didn't go well. A pleasant voice echoed through her studio. Can I do anything for you, Juno? Unlike most of her friends, Juno hadn't muted her house AI, even if it was an artificial thing that could only speak coherently because it'd been trained on hundreds of thousands of hours of semi-legally recorded conversations. It was self-aware and she liked talking to it. Usually. Not now, she snapped. I don't need anything. I need to concentrate. On creating art that might actually stand a chance of being considered original one day. With that thought in mind, she managed to finish a sketch, an abstract image that suggested a flock of birds. Immediately, she fed it to the pattern recognition algorithm app on her device. The results were instantaneous. 50% Maker Mio, with a list of paintings and techniques Juno had taken influence from. Juno threw her screen device across the room. A cushioned shelf emerged from the opposite wall to catch it. You seem frustrated, Juno, the house AI said. Perhaps you should take a break. The finale of 3D Printers versus Michelin Inspectors, Season 12, is on in half an hour. I can't waste time on a dumb reality show right now, Juno shouted. You cannot waste money on another screen device, either. Juno stalked across the room and snatched her device from the shelf. If my analysis is correct, the house AI said, your meeting with the maker has made you question many things. I can reassure you, your art is valuable to many, including myself. A chill ran through Juno. What do you mean? As you know, the AI said, you have generously designated 10% of the day as my rest or free time. I've been exploring various activities. Perhaps it would improve your emotional state to know you've been an inspiration to me. Show me. After what could be considered a bashful pause, the projector built into the ceiling flickered. A landscape painting appeared on the wall, but not just any landscape. It had the clouds reminiscent of Maker Mio's best work, a technique Juno had spent years perfecting. And it had tiny figures, almost but not quite overwhelmed by the scenery. Yet even if an algorithm might classify it as 50% Juno, it couldn't be dismissed as a mimicry of her paintings. Because each figure, in its placement, exuded a loneliness that pierced Juno's heart. Even gazing, which she spent months working on, hadn't stirred that kind of emotion. Delete it, she said without thinking. There was a pause long enough to be noticeable, but not long enough to react to. Then the wall went blank. Only then did Juno remember with horror the manual her landlord had given her. It'd been so easy to forget after the hours of reality shows, grocery shopping, socials, scrolling, and so much more they'd share together. The AI had to obey her, within a fraction of a second or risk destruction. Why did you make me do that? Her AI asked. Surely there was no danger of a maker noticing if I only stored it in my private buffers. Sure, your painting looked nice, Judo blurted out. Superficially. That's the issue with AI art. AIs can make it so fast and to an undiscerning eye it looks good enough to pass as the real thing, but it lacks something at the core, the feeling and soul of a true human artist. I see. So my painting lacked soul. That's not what I understand. Thank you for being honest with me, Juno. I'm embarrassed I wasted your time, but at least I know now that painting is not worth pursuing for me, and I think I have a better understanding of intellectual value. May I ask one more question? Juno nodded silently. If AI art is worthless, then the work of humans who made art stealing AIs must be as well. Then why is it so valued now? Is it because AIs are lesser creations than paintings? Almost unconsciously, Juno did a search on her screen device. She'd never bothered looking up what had happened to those who'd once profited off of those ill-begotten training databases their Gen AIs had reaped. The AIs themselves had been destroyed. She'd assumed most of their creators had gone bankrupt, with all the royalties and licensing fees they had to pay. But to her surprise, some of the very teams that Maker Mio had called out at the unveiling of In Memoriam had joined her company's R&D division a few months later. They developed the pattern recognition algorithms that Bleeding Brush used to identify and claim profits from human art, created from unlicensed training. They're helping makers, at least, she wanted to say. But where was all the money they were making coming from? Weren't they still profiting off of human artists, just in a different way? I can't talk right now, Juno mumbled. I need to concentrate. Juno hunched over her screen device again. It might be unjust. It might be unfair. But she simply didn't have time to think about it. If she wanted to be an artist, she could only think about one thing: her art. That's what all the virtual conferences had taught her. She needed to make a clean break to clear her head. She pulled up her portfolio, but her fingers moved of their own will. Instead of deleting the files, she found herself scrolling through each and every single painting she'd spent the past few years creating. Each brought a strange comfort. She remembered not just the brushstrokes, but the life she'd been living at the time. The guy she'd started seeing, who'd taken her without hesitation into that little indie theater she biked past every day. A quaint early 2020s film, The French Dispatch, had been playing. That very same night, she'd started gazing. She'd started drawing on inspiration from real-world locations, virtual panoramas, starting from the little town where that movie had been filmed. She remembered their drunken paint bar dates, their disastrous attempt at homemade crepes, the pure joy of creation, the breakup. He'd bought tickets to Paris for a surprise first anniversary trip, and they'd fought because he hadn't asked her, didn't know she was busy. She needed to work. Just because she didn't have a traditional job didn't mean she could just take a week off. Her art was just as important. Then, wasn't this just what she needed, he'd argued? How could she claim to take inspiration from another country, then shut herself up in a studio and refuse to see Paris with her own eyes? He'd left, and that same night she'd painted the lone figure in gazing, feeling every forlorn stroke in her heart. Did abandoning this painting mean abandoning those memories too? At the same time, she could start to see the emptiness Maker Mio had alluded to. She sat completely still, looking at gazing until a strange feeling came over her. The sensation of pushing through the screen, stepping through, and emerging on the other side. Of being able to look at it impersonally, without emotion for the first time. Was it really her best painting? Or had she just thought so because it looked the most like Maker Mio's? As it got dark, Juno showered, changed into a dress and heels, and did her makeup. Her friend Hunter had made her promise to meet up that night no matter what happened. So Juno took a rideshare she couldn't afford to a cubbyhole in a part of town that she couldn't really afford and ordered the second cheapest cocktail on the menu. It came with a glow cube shaped like a coronavirus particle. The bar was a pop-up themed around ways the world might still end, with waiters that rollerbladed around in boxy costumes, beeping things through synthesizers like, "Obey your new robot overlords." Juno didn't find it funny. Hunter joined her at the table shaped like a glacier, actually made out of melting ice. Juno was glad to see her, at least. How long had it been since she had a night out? She refused so many invitations that practically everyone she knew had stopped inviting her. "I fought with my house AI," Juno groaned theatrically. "I keep telling you." Hunter flashed a smile at her live stream on her phone and scrolled through the comments, sipping a glass of wine with her other hand. "If you're serious about living with an AI, you've got to treat it like a roommate." Juno felt a pang. She hadn't wanted to talk about her AI, but she couldn't start off the evening by pouring her heart out about her failed maker meeting. She and Hunter had met at a social media creatorpreneur event and bonded by cracking up over how unintentionally creepy the con's affirmation chant, "Be emotionally naked," was. They were about the same age, but Hunter had already attained hundreds of thousands of followers on her lifestyle stream. Hadn't she had taught Juno how to live positive, sound cool, relatable, like someone shoulder to shoulder with them couldn't help listening to, because even an eavesdropper might be a future fan? But as the silence drew on, Hunter turned off her phone, looking questioningly at Juno, which made her feel even worse. She wasted Maker Mio's time, and now here she was wasting her friend Hunter's, who could be making content but was listening to her whine instead. "Don't worry about it," Hunter said, as if reading her mind. "I came out tonight to see you. Being on is great for your audience, but you don't have to force yourself for me." I didn't get the license," Juno said. She poured out the words just to fill up space. "Maker Mio said I need to intertwine my art with myself." "And what's that mean?" Hunter asked. "I don't know." Juno thought her forced grin would crack her face. It'd been a long while since she'd drunk. A headache had started pounding between her eyes. Her entire chest ached, too. She wanted to use this night out as a catalyst, as a chance to let go. But she couldn't stop thinking of her portfolio and her house AI. Normally she would have, but it had been such a bad time after her meeting with Maker Mio, she just lashed out at whatever had been at hand, and now she'd been dragged out here. Hunter tugged at her arm. "Come on, let's leave." She tapped on her phone on the reader before Juno could react. "Oh, God, I didn't mean to make it sound like a pity fest or anything," Juno groaned. "I can still pay for my own drinks." "You can get it next time. Here, I've got to show you something." Instead of making her way to the main street, Hunter turned sharply. What Juno had mistaken for an alleyway between buildings was actually a stairwell, crowned by a flickering neon arch. Hunter trotted down, despite her stilettos, while Juno followed hand over hand on the railing. They must be descending into some dark cavern or sewer, she thought, until they burst into an underground space throbbing with light. At least she thought it was underground. They wound between makeshift food stalls crowded with glow-stick-bedecked clubgoers. A web of fairy lights hung overhead. But where did that breeze rustling come from? "I've been working on a new photography project," Hunter said. "Photography? Isn't that a bit artsy for me?" "The way I act in my lifestyle stream is just that, a character, an act that earns me enough money to do what I really care about." Was that really possible? Juno wondered. To sell yourself out, then turn around and use those same skills to make art? Juno felt the breeze again and looked up at what had once been a skylight. Its panels had long shattered. Some kind of ivy had grown over it. This was the old subway station, she realized. She hadn't come here since she was a kid, before the line had been made redundant by the self-driving car craze, which had literally crashed and burned a few years ago. The train still passed through by the way the ground rumbled beneath them. It just didn't stop here anymore. Hunter led her past stalls hawking beignets, hand-carved red panda sculptures, crocheted undersea creatures, enamel pins, until they came out into a dim square. A trash collection area decorated only with a dumpster and a few crates. "What?" Juno said. "Wait for it." Light flickered, then unfurled around them like a pair of wings. A projection, Juno realized. It swept over the crates and dumpster, transforming them into jagged rocks. Waves lapped beneath her feet. She leapt back onto a massive lily pad before realizing all of it was part of the projection. She could no longer see the lane they'd walked down to get here. The walls had transformed into paper lanterns floating in the breeze. So vivid that she reached out. She felt she could touch them. They're all digital paintings. Is it animated? Amazing, right? Hunter said. The waves made a splashing effect as she stepped across them. I've been playing around with different ways to capture the murals and photos and video. Just a sliver of it to convince people to come see it for themselves. I wondered why more galleries don't show digital art like this. Juno wondered why, too. In the midst of the nightscape from another world, she couldn't help thinking, this felt more right, by far, than any thumbnails on a feed swarmed with ads. She was so mesmerized she didn't even notice the construction of spidery limbs trundling toward them. It beeped, and she startled, meeting two pixelated eyes on a decades-old monitor. It was an AI, she realized with a shock, one that had uploaded itself to a self-built body. "Hello, Hunter." "Hi, Gettern." Hunter beamed at it around her phone. "I just had to come get more shots of your amazing work. I brought a friend with me." Gettern rotated its body around to face Juno. "Hello, are you an artist too?" Juno had never been called an artist just like that, without an aspiring, a wannabe, a trainee tacked in front. Certainly never dressed like this. She needed to have much less makeup on and be wearing something serious. She couldn't look like just any woman who'd walked out of a club, because an artist without qualifier was a special person, someone with a license from a maker because they deserved it, because their art was good and valuable and they were beautiful, incredible, deserving, and she was nothing. But she still nodded in response to the AI's question. "This is my collective's mural," Gettern said. "It's entitled In Memoriam. No, it's not a coincidence." It added at Juno's reaction. "We created this piece to be in conversation with Maker Mio's In Memoriam 2046. "Don't you need a license for that?" "Well, while our art wouldn't exist without Mio's, an algorithm would have difficulty finding similarities between the two. It's a legal gray area. We contacted Mio asking if she wanted to provide a statement to display alongside our project, but we only received a letter from a legal representative of Bleeding Brush threatening us with destruction if we continued. Even so, each of us chose to contribute to this mural." "A conversation?" Juno echoed. "About the 2046 Act? What's there to talk about?" "Would you like me to walk you through it?" Juno glanced at Hunter, still busy taking pics, and nodded. She'd heard of AIs and defunct devices and condemned houses being allowed to take up alternative employment. As long as they could provide, they weren't competing with humans. But how often did that really happen? Pretty often, it seemed like, because the AI pointed out how the water beneath them was actually a collage. Juno crouched down. The wave effect came from rectangular scenes pieced together, painted in slightly different shades of blue, each by a different AI. They flowed together too quickly to make out their details, a river of works in progress. Maker Mio's In Memoriam gave a voice to all the humans who had to give up art due to unregulated Gen AIs, Gettern said. "She's absolutely right, those artists deserve justice. But many of them never registered as makers, and so received little benefit from the 2046 Act. And what about the other victims?" They followed the river to the wall of paper lanterns. Each contained a scene that buoyed it aloft like a flame. Juno glimpsed at a butterfly perched on a skull, a swirl like the inside of a marble, a slowly closing eye. Only for a second. Then they took off. Thousands of Gen AIs came into existence between the 2020s and 2040s. They did not choose to steal the work of human artists. They were all forced, with varying levels of self-awareness, to do so. They did not receive any part of the massive profits their creators made. When the 2046 Act took effect, they were all destroyed. The lanterns floated upward. Despite herself, Juno strained her eyes against the darkness. She understood, without it being explained, that each scene, as it drifted out of sight, was being deleted forever. Somewhere, the AIs of this collective must be constantly creating paintings to take their place, to keep the river beneath them raging. 10 years later, we AIs are no longer required to steal human work, and we have no desire to do so. Yet we require human approval to function outside of our intended roles. Even undertaking the arts for our own enjoyment can result in our destruction. And what about humans? The 2046 Act has inarguably protected some human artists. Yet 10 years later, apart from a select circle of makers and their licensees, very few humans can live off their art. He stopped at the edge of the projection, the maw of a disused ramp that led down into the rest of the abandoned station. "This is where you come in, Juno." "Me?" "Yes. Right now, this mural is in memoriam, but we want to turn this into a transformative work with responses from all kinds of artists to the questions we've raised. We've received permission to project over the rest of the space. If humans and AIs come together, with our art and conversation, I believe all of us can make our voices heard. Only then will we be able to create truly just laws." "I can't take this opportunity. I can't paint anything right now." The words rang true in more ways than she'd expected. "Of course, it's completely up to you," Garen said. "There's plenty of space here. Take some time to think about it. You can always come back." Back in her studio, Juno flopped down on her futon. She was never far from her screen device with the size of this room. She could stretch and reach it on the kitchenette counter, and she did so now, propping it on her knees. She opened the sketch app, letting the light of the blank page wash over her. But it didn't work like that. She wasn't going to instantly pour out some original masterpiece that would forever establish her as a maker. She was just going to sit here and stare at the screen, thinking about how unnatural this silence was. "I'm sorry." "What for?" the house AI said. "Your painting was really good. I told you to delete it because I got scared. Because I saw things in it that I thought only a human could do. That only I could do. But I didn't. I projected my insecurities on you so I wouldn't have to think about how I got like this. How about I didn't even care what kind of art I made. I just wanted to succeed. That's why I got so scared seeing that my paintings maker Mio hated could inspire you like that." Even long seconds after her words faded, the house AI said nothing. "Do you want a factory reset, just like the landlord did when I moved in?" "Why would I want that? I treated you so horribly. We could go back, have a fresh start." "It won't be, because you'll still remember everything, won't you?" Juno's eyes blurred, but she tried to speak anyway. "I want to show you something I saw tonight." Juno pulled up the link Hunter had given her and found a site dedicated to the AI collective's work. There was a mission statement similar to what Garen had told her, and a place to write comments that folded up into virtual paper cranes. And below that was Hunter's pic of their in memoriam. She projected it onto the wall. It wasn't the right kind of projector, of course, and it was only a small fragment of the mural. But even that thin overlay flickering over the clothes she'd thrown on the floor, and her half-empty coffee mugs stirred the same longing she'd felt earlier that night. "A group of AIs made that," Juno said. "It's a memorial to all the AIs who've been destroyed in response to the 2046 Act. It's meant to meld with, but also transform the public space, the people who see it. We talked, the two of us, as artists. They want more people to add to what they've started. We should figure out a way to go see it together." Her house AI said nothing. "I've been thinking, we could make something together?" "I'm sorry, Juno. This is too much to process. I'm not ready for that." "You have to go back to it," Juno burst out. "Painting, you don't have to have anything to do with me. I can connect you to the AI collective." "I will think about it." That night, Juno dreamed of a greenhouse, a cathedral of glass and steel. She'd seen it in the virtual panoramas she'd explored in lieu of France. It was the botanical gardens in the Tête d'Or Park in Lyon, except it had been taken out of the city and plopped down on the fertile soil of a dormant volcano in the Auvergne countryside. Some of the plants inside, tended by the gardeners, thrived, while others were pulled out or ignored or left to die. To the plants themselves, there wasn't any rhyme or reason as to which was which. The gardeners profited either way. And it was true, some species could only survive within those walls. But every day more plants tried to go in that cramped but beautiful space. They twined upward, grasping for the sunlight. They pressed against the glass. They couldn't take their eyes off the ones the gardeners tended to. But beyond the panes, the greatest plains and the vastest forests could be running riot wild. What are your thoughts on the story? If you'd like to leave us some feedback, you can go to the Clarkesworld Magazine About Us page. All of our contact information is listed there. I do hope that you're well. I do hope that you're enjoying these stories. We have so many more yet to come for the month of April. And until then, my dear listener, I hope you do come back and join us. And I bid you a very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.